Hello everyone, okay, I hope we're all well and happy. This session today is going to be on New Labour. Now what you should have done already, and if you haven't done, you need to do this, there's the PowerPoint on the brief history of the Labour Party. That needs to be done, it's on Teams, that PowerPoint, and you can, there's a page in your workbooklet based around that. And then there was this table you had to do about the traditional values and policies of the Labour Party. So I was trying to bring it up. Again, that also needs doing. If you haven't got the sheet for this, then you need to get it. Let me just find the page in your workbooklet. Here we go. So from this, you can see that the main ideas and principles of the traditional Labour Party, things like equality. This is to try and create greater equality of outcome, so the differences between the rich and the poor should be lessened. It's not absolute equality, because that would be Marxism. It is trying to reduce those inefficiencies. Labour, traditionally, people like Anthony Crosland, one of the Labour key thinkers we'll be looking at later on, they argue that we should work with capitalism in order to try and bring about greater equality. We should use the money from capitalism and redistribute that money to help those at the bottom end. Collectivism, this idea that people working together to achieve basic aims, and universalism, this idea that some benefits should go to everybody in society, no matter how wealthy you are. So things like, like the NHS, for example, you could be a billionaire, you could be dirt poor, you get free healthcare provided by the state. Control of capitalism, so trying to make capitalism, this engine of wealth, work in favour of the people, trying to encourage businesses and stuff to try and pay their workers a decent amount, provide good living standards and working conditions for people. Things like the minimum wage fit very much into this kind of category. Social justice, this idea that everyone in society, in terms of gender, ethnicity, race, etc., should be treated equally and fairly, and there should be no kind of prejudices. This is why Labour in the 1960s introduced things like Equal Pay Acts and worker discrimination laws, these sorts of things to try and create that greater social justice. And then traditional Labour have obviously been the party originally of the working class, and they've sought to try and get rid of those class barriers and get rid of institutions and things in society which create these artificial barriers between the different social classes. So things like, to get rid of grammar schools, private education, Labour tend to be quite hostile to, because they just perpetuate class difference. If your mum and daddy are rich enough, you go to a posh private school, you therefore get a better education. Everyone's brain is the same. If you went to Eton or you went to Eton, you got the same brain, you should have the same opportunities to go to the best universities. So these are the values of the traditional Labour Party. Now, as you know from that PowerPoint, Labour lost power in 1979, 18 years of opposition, and because of this, and because of Thatcher had appeared in the 1980s, Labour came to recognise that the only way to achieve power again was perhaps to look at some of these traditional values and ideas and perhaps abandon some of them or modify some of them in light of the new kind of Thatcher consensus which had been created. So, first thing you need to do is watch this video. It is on BBC iPlayer, History of Modern Britain. It's called New Britannia. It's not quite as good as the Thatcher one. It's a bit less focused on New Labour. The first part actually is about John Major, the Conservative Prime Minister after Thatcher up until 1997. We will look at John Major in some detail when we do about Prime Ministers in Unit 2. However, it does place New Labour in some kind of context. So it is, well worth looking at, answering the questions on, because as I was just saying, it does place the New Labour into context and the rise of Tony Blair as leader of the Labour Party. The second part of the video, or from about a third of it inwards, then does turn towards New Labour in more kind of detail and talks about some of the things which they did in government as well. It's got a couple of scandals that took place, Northern Ireland, relationships with the Americans and obviously the Iraq War, but also towards the end it kind of reflects on some bigger change that had also taken place under the New Labour period. Question 28, how does Andrew Marr conclude about how Britain has changed? Actually, he made this video in about 2010-ish, something like that. It may have been even earlier than that. It might be worth actually reflecting how accurate you think Andrew Marr is, considering what's happened since this video was made, etc., etc. So once you've watched that, it should give you a nice idea about New Labour. We then just need to kind of knuckle down a bit on some of the details of New Labour. So, New Labour was this idea of Tony Blair, to end these 18 years of Conservative rule, where he kind of tried to make Labour more adaptable to the Thatcher kind of consensus. And on this page in your work booklet, you can see here, I've actually put on here some of the key differences for you. So, old Labour was dogmatic. That's another word for ideological, not willing to change. New Labour more pragmatic, like our One Nation Conservatives. And we've got here some of the differences and similarities between the two. There are then a couple of questions, because this awkward one about triangulation. What I'd like to do is there's a page on the Teams which kind of just covers this little area. So I would like to use that to complete these questions about triangulation and the third way. A lot of it comes from the ideas of someone called Anthony Giddens. Again, is someone we're going to come across when we do about socialism after Christmas. And then finally, I'd like to do this on clause 4. What this is Labour's constitution, their rule book, how Labour operates. And you might think this seems a bit kind of, don't know what the word is, why we're having to look at something to do with, the rules of the Labour Party. Well, this became quite an iconic thing, because Tony Blair, in 1996, I think it was, or 1995, 95 it was, so it's still in opposition, he gets rid of the old clause 4. This was a really important part of Labour's constitution. It was on the back of everyone's membership cards of the Labour Party, this old clause 4. And he's got a copy of the old clause 4 here. Okay, to secure for the workers by hand or by brain the full fruits of their industry and the most equitable distribution thereof, that may be possible upon the basis of the common ownership of the means of production. So what I'd like to do based on that are a couple of questions. So have a go at doing those. And what Tony Blair did, in some ways it was quite symbolic, changing clause 4, getting rid of Labour's long-term commitment to kind of nationalisation and some of these key features of old Labour, to this new clause 4 about dynamic economy and partnership with the private sector, a very different kind of clause 4. In some ways it was quite symbolic, but he was deliberately picking himself a fight against those of the left of the Labour Party, because then he could kind of prove to the media that Labour had changed. No longer was Labour committed to nationalisation and this kind of old language of 1918. They're now a modern party looking at the current situation Britain was in. So if you could do those questions, that would be great. And when we come back after half term, we're going to do this about the extent to which New Labour was actually different or not to old Labour. So that's what I'd like to do over half term. So I hope you all have a very enjoyable half term, and I'll hopefully see you in, depends when you watch this video, but roughly in a week's time.